When it comes to housing, it seems like everybody wants to talk about when is the bubble going to crash? When is the market going to take a nosedive? Well, let me tell you, over the course of the next year, there are 7 reasons that it is not going to happen. And I'm going to share them with you now. Hey, this is Erik Brown, and I want to thank you so much again for tuning in to the best of Beverly Hills and the best of Los Angeles, where we share with you the sights, the sounds, the smells of all things Beverly Hills and LA. Now, today, we're going to be talking about this market bubble or crash. And the cool part is I'm a transport to Los Angeles. I'm not originally from Beverly Hills, and so you get my eyes and ears as the perspective of an import, potentially just like you. And I would love to be able to bounce ideas and questions off you as they come up. We get dozens of phone calls and emails and text messages, visits to our website every day from folks that have questions on buying, selling, or investing in a house, and know that we are here to help. So drop us a line when you can. Now, like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, we're going to be talking about 7 big reasons that the market is not going to crash next year as we roll into it. So let's just dive right in. Reason number 1 that the housing market is not going to crash is the US economy. Now, I want you to think about the way that markets work: supply and demand, pricing of interest rates. And everyone is talking about that we're looking to be coming into an inflationary market. Now, what that means is pricing goes up, valuations go up, the value of your dollar goes down, but that still means that prices of items, groceries, gasoline, clothing, and houses continues to go up. Now, I want you to think about where the market has gone. Stock markets, mutual funds, bank savings accounts, they can ebb and flow. But think about certain stocks. As some go down, others go up. A great example is Zoom. Imagine if you invested in Zoom several years ago. Imagine if you invested in Bitcoin several years ago. The airline market may have gone down, but senior assisted living may be going up. These are just examples of how the economy continues to trend in a way that's going to affect housing this way more than this way. Reason number 2 that the housing market will not crash is the lending industry. So this time around, compared to, say, the recession of 2008 to 2010, we do have very low interest rates. And people try to compare this as a bubble compared to that market. Well, from a lending perspective, we have very different perspectives. Sure, interest rates are really low and pricing continues to go up. But right now, we have a lot of equity. U.S. residents that own homes on average have a lot more equity today than they did then. It was a bubble because the housing market couldn't sustain the valuations and people were coming in with 0 down or 2% down payments. Now people are coming in with 5, 10, 20% down payments. There's more liquidity in homes. And the lending requirements today are that much harder than they were back then. Back then we had programs that were called NINA or NINJA or stated income. What those mean, NINA would be no income, no asset, or NINJA would be no income, no asset, no job. These were requirements or a lack thereof to be able to get a loan. Today, you cannot get that anymore. So the lending power, the viability of the borrower is stronger. So when you, again, have tighter lending restrictions and more liquidity, it makes for a market that is that much more stable. Reason number 3 that the housing market is not going to crash is low inventory. The National Association of Realtors has said that over 50% of homes in 2021 went into multiple offers. That's crazy. Imagine if every other home that you looked at was being bid on by somebody else. And that's the case across the US. Now, particularly here in Beverly Hills, Los Angeles, and Southern California, it seems even more so. I had a client this year that wrote an offer on a property $200,000 over asking price, and we weren't in the top 10 out of 27 offers. 27! That's crazy to me that many people would bid on a house, and we bid that much more aggressively above asking price and didn't even sniff getting close to the pricing of that property. Now, thankfully, that buyer ended up getting a home, and we've got some tricks and some ideas of things that we can do in competitive markets. But when you have that low of supply and this much demand, it's going to continue to foster a market that will not crash. Reason number 4 that the housing market continues to look good is because of the supply chain. You probably have heard on the news how hard it is to get goods into the US. Think of us as a global economy and all the things that are created, anything from lumber and drywall to microprocessors. And it's not just houses, it's cars, it's appliances, it's holiday goods. It's a series of things that's just that much harder. If you've heard of someone that's trying to buy a car or trying to remodel their home, you might hear that they had to wait several months. And that's going to be an ongoing challenge. Hopefully the supply chain that we have going within the US, shipping goods back and forth, gets itself solved relatively soon, but that only makes the housing market that much more challenging. Now, when you combine that with the fact that builders who are not keeping up with local demand, they're not building enough homes for the area because they don't have enough supplies. It just means, again, as I talked about before, when we have this much supply and this much demand, it makes it that much harder and that much tighter of a market. Why would we crash in a market like that? This is usually a really good spot for me to stop and say, hopefully this information is pretty cool. Hopefully this makes sense as you're thinking about buying or selling in Beverly Hills or the local area. Now, if you are, or even better, if you know someone who is, they might find information like this valuable in this video or some of the others that we create. So I encourage you to hit that like button, smash subscribe, and share this with other people that you think would benefit for this as a resource. Let's jump in to reason number 5 that the market is not going to crash. And that's because of demographics. Now think about the US and Southern California and Beverly Hills mirrors that identity in certain aspects. So when you think about the demographics of the US, we've got 350 million people, give or take. About a fourth of them are baby boomers. Now those are folks that are now in the position of retiring, they are downsizing, they are aging. At some point relatively soon, that demographic is going to be looking at assisted living en masse. Now, when that happens, that's going to open up some inventory, but it hasn't yet. And they're sitting on a lot of liquidity. There's a lot of people that own their homes outright or have huge equity stakes in their property. When that transition shifts, that will open up inventory. But as of now, it hasn't happened in full. Now, when you couple that with another fourth of our country is millennials or younger, they're starting to come into the bulk of their purchasing power. Typically in a given year, about 45% of the home sales are first-time buyers. That has not happened a lot lately, partially because pricing is so high and also because millennials and younger have not been able to tap into buying power, maybe making decisions of purchasing a property. Mind you, for a lot of them, they graduated college during the recession. The economy was in the dumps at that point. And so now they're looking at having buying power to be able to purchase homes. Now, when you get 75 million people that are looking at purchasing property and we only have this much inventory to begin with and all of the other reasons that we brought up, it's going to be even more of a challenge, put that much more of a stress or tension on the marketplace. Number 6 is something that we kind of tapped on a little bit before, but I want to expound upon it, and that is positive equity. Now, again, think about during the recession, even the Great Depression of the 1920s, nobody had equity. Home values tanked. They weren't worth anything. Well, now we're in an opposite position. So anyone who's bought and owned a home for a while, if we're seeing 5, 8, 10+% interest and it is compounding, after a couple years, you've got some huge value in your property. Now imagine that's after a couple years. What if it's 5, 10, 20 years? It's really easy for your property to be with double. Plus, you've got principal reduction. Each time that you make a payment, you're paying down the note. And so now you've got equity in your property then. So because we've got so many people with huge equity, it is unlikely that we're going to see as many distressed properties or foreclosures, which are usually another area of potential supply if we're looking at a bubble that would burst. Now, there is an argument that because we've seen moratoriums on foreclosures and evictions, that we may see a run of people that did not make payments on their mortgages. But remember what we talked about before, the viability of equity that people have in their property. The people that made purchases before had harder lending restrictions, and they had lower interest rates, and they generally have seen more equity. So it's unlikely that they're just going to foreclose on a property that continues to go up in value, unlike it was during the recession. Last but not least, as I just touched on, but we're going to give it its own bullet point, and that is the lack of defaults or lack of foreclosure properties. Again, I used the recent example of about 10 to 15 years ago. We saw a great recession, as it was called. And at that time, for a little bit of a history lesson for those of us that do not know, people were buying properties with zero down, and there was an inflated sense of value. We had a massive glut of supply. Builders kept building, more inventory kept getting dumped into the market, inflating properties, and inevitably when that burst, you had this much supply and this much demand. The exact opposite of what we have now. And so because of that, with major supply and no demand for it, property values dropped. They dropped, the national average was about 34%. Now here we're in the opposite, we continue to gain in value. And so it's unlikely that if someone has, I'll take an example, they purchased their property for $1 million and now it's worth $1,400,000. They're not going to foreclose on that property. They're just going to sell it and tap out the equity if they are behind on their payments, if they cannot catch up. So again, this idea of waiting for a series of foreclosures to happen, it's unlikely that that's going to happen with any level of detail. And those, my friends, are our 7 big reasons that the market is not going to crash. So if you're considering buying a property, you're going to want to tap in sooner than later because it's projected that we're going to continue to go up in value. If we go up 5 or 10%, I'll use the example of a $10 million property at 5%, that's $500,000 more that you're going to pay next year compared to what you would pay today. 10% is $1 million more. I've had a number of clients that have owned their properties for 10 years that they might have purchased for $2 million and today it's worth $4 million. Imagine that amount of equity gain. It's a pretty great investment, let alone a place to be able to hang your hat and call it home on your own. So again, if you have any questions, ideas you want to bounce off, you want to talk about this further and go into the weeds or shoot the breeze on it, know my team and I would absolutely love to help. So thank you again so much for connecting. As always, we are a phone call, an email, or a website visit away to be able to help you at any time that you have questions. As always, we are 1 click away from your dream home goals. So touch base with us when you can. Thanks.